Appreciate it. And welcome everybody to today's event this morning. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. You've got our contact information here too if you'd like to follow up with us afterwards, and we'll include that at the very end. So for today's attendees also, we have, for those attending, we have, if you'd like, you can follow up afterwards, and we'll offer on the Pinpointe side a month of free Pinpointe service. So basically if you want to go to the website afterwards, if you decide you want to go to the website and sign up, you get a coupon code here that you can use, and that'll be good for a first month of free service. Net Prospects also has an option or an opportunity if you follow up with Mark afterwards at hello@netprospects.com. Well, they'll include up to 100 contacts out of their 19 million business contacts that are available. And just sort of the 60-second who we are and why we're here, a little bit of background. So Pinpointe, what sets Pinpointe apart? Pinpointe, as Mark mentioned, is an on-demand email marketing platform. We're really focused on being the most feature-rich email marketing solution. So we're sort of a half step between email marketing and marketing automation. So a lot of extra features for testing and support and so forth that you would typically find in a marketing automation platform, but in an email marketing platform. We also have an enterprise edition for customers or companies who need to send very high volume and or who need to have multiple logins. So we have the ability to go from anywhere from 5 to 250 plus user logins. We have some of our unique features include behavioral targeting, which we'll actually show a case study on today, where we can improve results by about 35%. And in summary, a nice quote from one of our customers is we're sort of a constant contact on steroids. That's sort of our quick 60-second background on Pinpointe and why we're here. And Mark, if you want to take just a moment to tell them about Net Prospects, and then we'll jump right into the presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Craig. So Net Prospects is a sales and marketing database that uses crowdsourcing. We have 19 million decision makers in our database, including email. And our customers are mostly marketers who need to purchase lists for their marketing campaigns. So we work with a lot of folks who do email marketing, and that gives us a lot of insight. A lot of them use Pinpointe for their email campaigns, and so we love doing these educational webinars with Craig to help people do their jobs better.
Okay, thank you. We actually have a lot of customers, so I'll add to that is, so Net Prospects also has some data on social information and so forth for their prospects. And so we have a lot of customers that will also take their existing data and augment it or look to augment it with Net Prospects information. So if you're collecting you're doing the proper job and collecting your names and contacts within your website and opt-in and so forth, but you might not be collecting all of the other information, or you want to verify, title, company information, address, and so forth. That's also another good use for Net Prospects data, so just to point that out. So, well, great. With that, I'll move forward. So today's topics, what are we going to cover, how are we going to go over today? What are we going to go over today? Today we're going to talk about a little bit about split testing. We've created a couple specific examples here that we're going to demonstrate for you to show you some specific points in data. Now, the background for this is what Pinpointe's done is an email provider. We've taken a slice of data of, I don't know, somewhere in the range of a couple thousand or tens of thousands of email campaigns and hundreds of millions of emails. We've taken a slice of data here for the last several months and done a lot of analysis and so forth. But what we've done for today's presentation is distilled down some very specific split testing case study examples that demonstrate our data in a larger set, if you will. So what we're going to compare today is some pretty important questions we get on a very regular basis from our customers. But one would be the send from address, which is better, sending from a company or from a person for business to business. The second is comparing information on subject lines. The third is the use of special offers. And the fourth is behavioral targeting. And we'll throw in some other tips along the way as we go, but we narrowed down some split tests specifically to demonstrate these four areas, and we'll present the data today. Our methodology for the split testing is we use the Pinpointe split testing tool. The sample sizes for all these, unless they're designated otherwise, are between 10 and 50,000 email sends per variation, and we used a random sampling for each one. So these are samplings out of our database, out of the Pinpointe contact database, and our split test feature. And where possible or unless otherwise noted, we would vary a single variable or single option. In some cases, we did multiple variations, and that's identified in the particular test. Okay, so the first one, the send from. So one question that comes up an awful lot from our customers is the send from address, how does the send from address impact results? Are you better to send the email from your company name or from a person's name? So we try 3 different variations here to give you some data. Now, I should qualify again, our data is primarily for business-to-business customers. Most of the time, business-to-business, business-to-consumer is very similar, but in some areas, and I'll try to point them out along the way as it's available, in some areas you'll find B2B and B2C being notably different. When we look at business-to-business information or business-to-business cases, which is, again, where our focus of our data is here, I think you'll see something different than what you would see in B2C. It's kind of surprising results. But anyway, what we did is we tried the first variation being info@pinpointe.com, and the actual text was Pinpointe Webinars. So if you look in your inbox, what you would see would be typically Pinpointe Webinars, the actual text that's displayed, and the send from email address was info@pinpointe.com. The second was yours truly, Craig.Stouffer@pinpointe.com, and the text being my name, Craig Stouffer. And the third, we tried one of our folks here, Carol Cohen@pinpointe.com, with the text, of course, being Carol Cohen. Now, one thing that comes up here is I pretty much always get somebody that points out, well, Carol can be a man's name too, but I think for most purposes, most people, Carol is typically a woman's name, but we'll compare the test and results here. The sample sets in these examples were on the smaller side of our test. They were typically 10,000 active B2B contacts. And when we did the sending, we sent for these tests on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. This particular test, they were all sent, the 3 different variations were sent at the same time on a Tuesday morning. So if you look at the results here, the summary information, we're looking at both opens and clicks and some interesting information. Clicks are probably more, in our perspective, more indicative because somebody can open an email and then immediately hit the delete key. What you really are more interested in as a marketer is what's the engagement level. And the click tracking is something that's more indicative of the level of engagement with your prospects. So we've collected both sets of information here. This is a screenshot from our split testing, but you can see looking at both opens and clicks. So if you see the 3 different bars there, the first one being info at, the second being Craig Stouffer at Pinpointe, and the third, of course, being Carol Cohen. So what we see is, you know, by going from company name to individual person, we roughly exactly doubled the numbers with respect to clicks. The opens were up substantially also, but pretty big difference. And then when we had a, I guess it's a combination of being a typically female name and also perhaps slightly more common name, either way, what we saw is an even greater uplift. So you can see here pretty big difference in the results. So in this perhaps somewhat contrived case study, a smaller case study, we see a big difference in summary of using a personal name versus the business name. And so this is actually very consistent with what we see across when we did the broader scale analysis of a few hundred million emails across our customer base. We see that very consistently in the business-to-business environment, sending from an individual's name at the company or somebody that basically the person that your recipients would expect to, or the name that the recipients would expect to hear from is what generates the best results. So in my summary table, you can see here, if I use the company name or info@pinpointe.com as my baseline, by going to using my individual name, we had a 22% increase in opens and exactly doubled the clicks. Version 3, when we used Carol Cohen, we actually had a 38% uplift and 142% increase in clicks. So pretty substantial difference. Now again, this is maybe slightly more extended or enhanced than what we see across our customer base as percentages in clicks, but you very consistently see an uplift for B2B when you use the name, sent from name being an individual. Now B2C may be very different. Clearly, I don't know about you, but if I got an email from Steve Jobs, I know I'm going to open it, right? If I really think it's from Steve Jobs. But other than that, in many companies in B2C, the name of the company obviously is different level of branding and so forth. And so in B2C environment, and if you look at results and analysis from business to consumer type of emails, I think you may actually see just the opposite. But the takeaway for you is you should communicate primarily by using the send from information should be who your recipient is most likely to expect to communicate from. And the other piece of takeaway here is test. You have a tool. You have tools available, whether it be in Pinpointe or typically in other email products. Most of the reasonable email service providers have products that will allow you to, or features rather that allow you to do split testing. So the other takeaway again is just really test and see how it works best in your environment. Okay, case study number 2, and I'll go through this, and Mark, if you want to see a couple questions coming in, and folks, if you want to type in a few more questions, Mark, if you want to take a look at those and grab 1 or 2 for me while I go through this, and then after this case study, we'll take a quick break and work a few questions in. So case study 2, subject lines. Again, we distilled this down into 2 very simple examples we wanted to be able to present quickly and summarize for you. But the first is, how does the email subject line impact response rates? And in particular, we looked at, does personalization impact results, and does subject line length improve or impact the results? And as a side note, we have a whole separate webinar that we did about 3 weeks ago, and we'll do again in a couple months with some updated content on writing tips. So we just go over the entire writing structure of email and some tips across the board on how to write emails. And subject lines are an area that we cover. As a quick side note, subject lines are so important for you that literally 50% or more of your recipient's decision to open your email and to interact with your email is based on the subject line. So even though these are some very simple takeaway points, they're very, very important. As you build your email and email campaigns, you should really spend a tremendous amount of time, or a big portion of your time actually, on the subject line. So this is reasonably very important information. So if I look at the bottom 2 points, we just very simply compare the long versus short subject lines. I'll flip back on the previous slide. You can see the different subject lines. What I'm comparing, I'm going to talk about at the moment, would be the first one where we've got just the the fourth one here where it says split test case study. So that's our short one that has, I believe, 42 characters. And then the option C here, case study webinar using split testing to improve HTML email response rates, February 4th. Please join us. So very, very long subject line. So we got 2 ends of the spectrum. And what we found here is, interestingly, is there's a huge difference just comparing these 2 graphs between a long subject and a short subject line. In this particular test, you can see it was a 4x difference, 0.45 to 1.8% in the click-through. We're just comparing click-throughs in this particular example, but a huge difference. When we've done broader analysis, where we've looked at anywhere from 20 to 23 characters per subject, it's kind of hard to get much shorter than that, right? Other than to say hey or hello, say anything meaningful. But nonetheless, we got down to about 20, 22 characters, all the way up to approximately 100 characters. We'll see anywhere across the board from a 10 to 25, 30% uplift, virtually guaranteed. And certainly in some extreme cases, you see like this a much, much broader, much larger uplift. So these are 2 ends of the spectrum, to make a point and demonstrate. You can see there's a very, very big difference, and this is very consistent with what we see for B2B. And I think one of the other key things is when you force yourself to try to focus on keeping the subject line short, and I'll give away the tip, which is really you want to stay between 40 and 50 characters, including spaces. So if you stay in that sweet spot. That also forces you, I think, quite often, or forces us as marketers to be more targeted, more focused, more explicit in the subject line, right? And so there may be an added benefit that by being shorter, you're more concise and more specific, and you end up with a better subject line. So anyway, that's that. The upper 2 bars really focused on comparing 2 extremes for personalization. If I flip back to the previous slide, this graph really is comparing 2 different things in one slide. But what we did is we have 2 variations. We're comparing the A and B variations on the top 2 bars. So the first is we simply put the person's first name in. So this gets entered as Craig or Carol, webinar, split test case studies. B is the identical to this, but we also put dear first name in the email introduction and in the intro to the following 2 paragraphs. So as a quick skim through the email, I'll show you the email in just a moment. In the second variation that's personalized, we use the person's name, specifically their first name, also within the body of the email. So here's what's interesting. So flipping back here to the statistics, it'll show up in just a moment there. When we look at the subject name with the introductory paragraph, or the introductory, where we use the recipient's first name, we found that there's a notable uplift, right? So in this example, it's roughly a 50% uplift in using personalization within the body of the email, and very, very simple personalization. But I think another takeaway, because we actually ran these 4 variations together, the other interesting thing that is interesting to compare there is that the subject line, when you put the recipient's name, and it was still a short subject line, still way underperformed where we had a short subject without the recipient's name. So you might think that was kind of counterintuitive. Why is it that personalization overall did less or was less important than just focusing on the length of the subject line? And I think the reason is if any of us go look in our spam folder nowadays, okay, and if you look, you'll see probably that 60% of the emails in your spam folder, my guess, all have your first name in or your email address in as the subject line at the start of the subject line. So what's happened is whereas what we're talking about personalizing the subject line with the recipient's name, for example, or the email address might have been good practice a couple of years ago. Not a big surprise given that spammers tend to still do that substantially and very, very frequently. That's now almost become a bad practice. And so what's happened is I think that's dropped the, both spam filters and recipients. If you see your name in the subject line, most of us, I think, will tend to, immediately hit the trash button or skip it, unless we absolutely know what the email is that will, recognize everything about the sender. So anyway, there's some interesting takeaway points for you on that. So before I go to case study number 3, we've got a couple questions that have come up. Mark, do you have a couple you'd like to work in?
Sure, absolutely. So let's see if we can stump the Craig here. My favorite webinar sport here. All right, so let's go back when we were talking about email addresses and names. Have you tried a name such as Craig Stouffer, but with a generic email address? I was wondering if you could talk about that. And that's from Anya.
That's a good question. So, for example, if the text said Craig Stouffer or Craig Stouffer, and the actual email address was info@pinpointe.com. No, that's a good question. That's something we may put in a future test. We try to, for the purposes of distilling information down and being able to present it quickly, we came up with some very simple examples, and certainly a couple variations that I think we'll put at the end of the slides here as future case studies to really drill down to the next level of detail on, and/or our analysis through our more detailed analysis with a longer set of data from customers, would be to do that, right? For example, Craig Stouffer and info@.
I think, Craig is, you're always looking at it sort of from the really analytical perspective, and I'm always looking at it from the, empathetic marketer's perspective. And when I'm sent an email, I like to, feel it's more of a one-on-one communication. If it's going to be like a personalized email from a salesperson, even though I know half the time it's coming from the marketing department, or most of the time it's coming from the marketing department. So if it says it's like, Craig Stouffer in the name, but it's like, info@ or no reply at or marketing at or something like that, I feel it's like somebody's like, doing a little bit of a bait and switch, or they're trying to trick me a little bit. I'd rather that it has the name of the person and their actual email box, because when they don't have the actual email address, to me it says as the recipient that they don't want me to reply to it. It says like, look, we're just sending something out, but we don't want to have a conversation with you. So I feel a little bit irritated as the recipient in that case. So I can't speak to clicks and opens and things like that, but I can tell you, from a brand perspective, it's going to have an impact, and it may sort of result in lower clicks and lower perception and some other attributes that are important as a marketer.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and to bring closure to that, if any of you read Seth Godin's book, I think he was originally one of the top execs, marketing execs at Yahoo. He's got multiple books and topics, blogs and so forth, focusing on the subject of email in particular, still being a medium and an opportunity to engage or to have a one-on-one interaction with your audience and with your recipients and so forth. So again, that could be a whole topic for another whole webinar, but the takeaway in that is the personalization, and you've got an opportunity to engage one-on-one basically with your recipient still with email, and so use it that way in most cases. So
right. So another question is, in these split tests and in general, are we talking about HTML email, or are we looking at kind of text-based email?
Yeah, good question here. So I just paged forward here my screen, although this is for a different case study presentation. This gives you an idea what the email was. It was very straightforward, and we used personalization throughout. But this was the basic content. So what we find, which is again topic for a whole different webinar, but I'll give a summary points, which is we find that for business to business, as a good generalization, primarily text with very limited graphics is what tends to work the best, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more. So this was basically the text content, the email content. It was rendered in HTML, obviously, as you can see, because I have links and different fonts. We have a Register Now button, which we find just actually sticking a button or a button plus text will give you an uplift in your interaction with your emails. But anyway, so this is the actual email if you want to get a visual of what it looks like.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm also going to take a a sharp left turn here on you, Craig, as that what we've been finding also at Net Prospects is that we've been finding day of the week makes an impact on this as well, and we've started actively doing certain kinds of sends on weekends and other kinds of sends during the week. So we send more educational HTML, which tends to be more HTML-based content out on the weekend. People like to read on the weekend. They're now carrying their BlackBerries and their iPhones to their kids' soccer games and reading at home. And during the week, it's more business one-on-one communication. Hey, would like to set up an appointment and those types of things where you identify hand raisers and put people into the sales funnel. So I think there's some interesting things taking place with mobile and with changes in how people are working.
Yeah, that's a good point. And although I don't have a slide on it in today's presentation, we've covered it in previous presentations. I sat in on a webinar also, and this question does come up, so we must well take a moment to touch on it, which is which are the best days to send. And what's interesting is we found, you've gone into some more detail about different types of emails, but what we find is B2B and B2C are very different. In B2B, we've analyzed, across our customer base. We have also tried sending ourselves, very early morning, mid-morning, and early afternoon, every day of the week. So we've tried across the board just within our own data. And very consistently what we find for B2B, the more direct communications, is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday still tends to be the best. For those of us, those are our Pinpointe customers who are on the line today, hey, we'd love you to send it off times because all of our volume comes in primarily Tuesday through Thursday. But nonetheless, that is very consistent what we've seen. Now, what's interesting is I sat on a webinar from HubSpot where they presented some data from MailChimp. And MailChimp, I have to say, had done an excellent job with some data analysis and presentation. And they saw exactly opposite. Now, their data set is very different. It's much heavier business to consumer, and not just the audience and not just the type of content, but the audience. There's a lot of Yahoo, Gmail, and so forth within their data sets across the customers. And what they were finding was that Saturday and Sunday were giving the best uplifts, and I think Tuesday followed by Wednesday would then after that the next best days. So I guess the takeaway from that, what we see very consistently B2B is B2B communication Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning. You've got educational content. That's a very interesting tip to try to send on the weekends, that kind of content. If you're online here and you're in B2C, then you might find Saturday, Sunday. The biggest tip is go try it for yourself, right? I mean, at the end of the day, audiences are different, and take a little bit of time to test and experiment and see what works best for you and your audience. So let me move forward to case study number 3, and then we'll take a little break and do some more, try to work some more questions in. So this is focusing on special offers, and we distilled this down to 3 different examples. The first was a relevant offer. Again, this is business to business, a relevant offer. And what I mean by relevant was, it was an invitation to join one of our webinars, for example, that Net Prospects and Mark and I had done previously. And the offer was, just like similar to what you saw here, where there's a month of free service and some data. So it's, in this case, relevant to the audience. This closely mirrors data that we've seen when we do deeper analysis within our customer base. So, but it's tended to be a simple example of that particular scenario. The second is we did a live drawing for an iPod Nano. We've tried different variations. We see customers do this all the time. Join our webinar and grab a you get a T-shirt drawing or a Nano drawing or an iPad drawing, depending how big it is, whatever. So that's the second one. The third is no special offer. It was just hey, come join the webinar. Here's the details. Sign up now, please. The method was we used our split testing tool. We ran the 3 concurrent variations together, and in this sample set, the email, so you can get a feeling for it, the email layout. Slide should come up in just a moment. The email layout here, as I pointed out earlier, is the only thing that varied in this is the yellow spot down here. So it either said get an iPod, or it said free information, or this block was missing. So that's the only difference in the 3 different variations. Okay, so we ran the test, and what was very interesting is we compared the iPod offer versus no offer. There's virtually no difference. If you look at in the middle here, the first and third bars, there's virtually no difference between those two. What gave the best engagement level, and interestingly, the subject lines were identical, even though the opens were slightly higher for the business offer. Interesting, but I have a theory for that. But anyway, the business offer is the one that gave us the notable uplift. There's 35–40% uplift, and so there's probably a couple reasons for that. The first is, let me touch on how in the heck did you get slightly better open rates recorded if the subject line was identical in all of them. And so I think the theory on that is, the information on that is, without getting into a ton of detail, the way that an email tracks, or the way that email systems or email providers can track and open is we put a little hidden image or an invisible image in your email, or in the recipient's email. There isn't part of a protocol, unfortunately, within SMTP that says, hey, somebody opened or clicked or did something with your email. So we have to work around it. We put a little tracking image, and when the recipient goes and grabs, or their email system goes and grabs that image, then we know that the email's been opened. That's basically the way that, give or take, at a very basic summary, how the email vendors have done that for some time. So I think the reason that the opens clicked were slightly higher is, by default, we see a lot of people now, it's on the order of 65%, 70%, have images disabled by default. So it's not until they go in and they go, I'm going to actually read this, and there's a little spot in the middle that's blank where the register button should be, and so then they click display images, and so that actually will increase the tracking of open slightly. So interesting side note there. But anyway, aside from that, when we compare the results, we find, as you can see, the difference is when we had between the two, when we had a business offer, we had for opens a 9% improvement. When we had the clicks, this is looking at unique clicks, we had a 46% improvement comparing either a no offer or a nano offer, because those were virtually identical, versus a business offer. And just a couple thoughts on the either drawing for a nano or for a T-shirt or whatever. One, I think what you're going to find consistently is if you use that type of a drawing or that kind of a draw for your webinar or for your survey, for example, what you're going to find is you get a lot of people that are interested in nanos or iPods or whatever you're drawing, and people who are less interested in your actual product. So it might be better, actually, maybe you don't want those people on your particular event because there's a cost associated with bringing them in. So, so that's one thing to consider. The other is, interestingly, as a side note, iPad has now become, if you put it your subject line or iPod rather, is actually some spam filters now will add a little bit to your spam score on that. So sort of an interesting side note. But third, I think, is there's just a better level of engagement we find when the business offer or when the offer is relevant, and in this case would have more value to the recipient than something like in this case, tangible like an iPod. So the Nano. So the takeaway from this would be, one, no real need. Maybe Apple doesn't like this, but no real need to to give away a consumer product for most of these. The place where this is relevant, because we see a lot of B2B customers are using email for invitations to webinars, invitations to lunch and learn events, and invitations to participate in surveys. Those are probably the 3 top pieces. And Pinpointe has built-in surveys, just like SurveyMonkey, for example. So that's a standard feature. So those tend to be the 3 top areas, aside from obvious newsletter communication, that we see our customers using email. And the takeaway would be, in particular, for example, if you look at surveys, the best thing that recipients are interested in is, if they're going to participate in the data or in the survey, is to share the data with them. So that's going to be we find consistently, that's a much better draw and much more likely to get your recipient engaged than to do something or to offer something like a Nano that isn't necessarily relevant. And I think the other byproduct in particular in surveys is, in that example, you'll get people who want to see the data, and then consciously or subconsciously they're more likely to also give you more accurate, honest data, as opposed to, hey, I want to get a drawing for an iPod, so I'm just going to flip these numbers in and get done. Okay, so anyway, let's take just a moment before I go to personalization. And Mark, do you have another question or two we should work in, and then I'll go forward?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different questions that have come in, and I was wondering if you could, a few people have been asking around business to consumer, and do these rules apply to business to consumer? I was wondering if you can comment on that from subjects and some of the other points that you've touched on. Maybe you could spend a couple moments commenting on that.
Sure. So for most of the information it will apply for B2B and B2C. We touched, although I didn't have a case study presented this morning on it, we did touch one area that's very different, which is the days of the week to send. We'll also talk about time of day to send, but I do have a little bit on that to touch on. But day of the week to send, you will likely see different information of B2B, different results for B2B and B2C, as we talked about. The second takeaway is for the subject line length. This sounds very tactical, but you think about it, it's a huge difference. It's got to be your best return on investment of your time for optimizing your emails. Is a shorter subject line will virtually always overperform a longer subject line with email. I'm sure there are exceptions and statistical anomalies, but that's a really good starting point of advice for you, is try to stay in a sweet spot of between 40 and 50 characters for your subject line. B2B, B2C, B to XYZ, doesn't matter. You're going to see very similar, takeaway results for that. Third, another area would be graphics and the use of graphics and graphic images within your emails. That's where I think you'll see some difference. I don't have data to present on this, and we're doing some other analysis on it. In our business, about 80% of our customer base, a little more than 80%, is actually B2B. So, but if we do at least a high-level analysis of B2B, B2C, you may find that imagery are more important for getting engagement or drawing engagement with business to consumer than with business to business. So that's an area where you would find some difference. Although I don't have data to present, I can tell you generically there will be a difference in the engagement level. A quick caveat on that is a lot of people don't necessarily take into consideration, or perhaps they're more sophisticated in B2C versus B2B on this particular topic, is that, as I said, 70% of your emails, the email is going to be, the images by default are going to be blocked. So if you factor that in mind and you create an email that has a lot of great graphics, and then you don't use the alternate text, or you don't utilize and lay the graphics out properly in your email, you're going to get a recipient, or the recipient's going to get 3 words of text and a bunch of little blocks that are blank, and that's not a very engaging email. We've had customers that have done stuff where they have a brilliantly laid out email that they've laid out. It looks great in PDF, and they take a screenshot of the PDF and try to send this one big image, and the recipient's inbox says image.jpg, right? Because that's the alternate text associated with the image, and that's all they get. I mean, that's just not very interesting to open an email. The only thing you see is, image.jpg, sincerely, John Doe. So anyway, so there's a summary of a couple key points I think that are similar versus different between B2B and business to consumer.
Sure. Would you like another question?
Sure. Let's take one more, and then we'll press on.
Okay. So, and I apologize, I meant to get to this one earlier. When you're looking at this data, or maybe you could just comment in general, Craig, is that are there some differences in response rates or behavior of the metrics depending on whether you're sending to newer customers or newer data versus older data, people that have been in the system longer? I was wondering if you could kind of address that.
That's a great question. Certainly there'll be differences, and I think it's going to vary, across the board depending on, each of your particular audiences. We find for us that our engagement levels, and I was just sort of thinking off the top of my head, some of our larger customers that do more frequent sends, the engagement levels stay very similar. Engagement meaning if I look at both opens and clicks. So open rates, for example, and this touches on a question that comes up all the time, hey, what are good and typical open rates? For us, we see anywhere from 18 to 26% of unique opens. So we also find that there, if you see 1,000 unique opens, there might be, 1,200 to 2,000 individual opens because people might forward your email or they may click on it multiple times. But if you look at the unique percentage of opens, we see anywhere from 18 to 28%, I should say. So it's a broad range, but that's roughly what we see both for us. We tend to be much more on the higher end for our audience, but our B2B customers tend to be roughly in that bracket. And I think we see pretty consistent engagement levels if the content that they're sending is, informative and engagement and targeted and so forth. Where you see a customer that just simply sends a blast out because it's like, oh my gosh, it's that time of the month, we got to get our newsletter out, and it may not be as valuable and informative for the target audience, then I think you'll see a drop-off. So it's a good question. I don't have specific statistics. I have some experience from having looked at some of our customers I've worked with and our own data where the takeaway question for you, or the takeaway response for you is, as long as you stay engaging and you're offering substantial value to your recipient and you're sending when you have something valuable to say, not because it's the second Tuesday of the month and I've got to get it out because that's what I'm supposed to do or my boss is going to get down on me, right? If that's your approach, if your approach is to send valuable content, then you'll see consistent engagement levels, and you'll start to see pass along and social sharing and so forth too. So you'll see, consistent level of engagement. If you start to see, your analysis is that, so two things. One is if you start to see your open and or your click rates start to decline, and another interesting data point to look at is what are the percentage of click-throughs as a percentage of opens, not as a percentage of the total sent, but as the percentage of opens. So if you see those two data points start to decline over time, what that probably says is you're not engaging very well with your audience. You might be sending too frequently. Your information isn't very, isn't as valuable to them. So that's where I would encourage you to spend some time to, stop, check, do some testing, engage with some of your recipients one-on-one if you can, and find out what's more valuable. So hopefully that covered and answered your question.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, well, good. So in the interest of time, let me move forward on this one. This is, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but we took personalization, and again, for the purposes of making a quick and simple presentation today, we came up with two very simple examples at opposite ends of the spectrum. We ran two concurrent campaigns, used a split testing tool, ran these variations simultaneously. We have, the first version is no personalization. So the send from was info@pinpointe.com, and I think it was Pinpointe Webinars or Pinpointe. There's no personalization in the subject line. There was no personalization throughout the email. So it didn't say, Dear John or Hi Joe or whatever. There was no use of anything custom within the email. The second variation is we use the recipient's name within the salutation, and then 2 times throughout the body at the starting paragraphs, and then also in the subject line. Now, as I presented earlier, using the recipient in the subject line may have, in fact, lowered this result relative to what it might have been without that. So it's an interesting point there. But anyway, so we have two very straightforward, primarily text-based content. The spam score was very low on this. The spam score is like 0 or 1. That's just an interesting side note to bring up. And the results are, what we found are, when we did some personalization, the personalized versus non-personalized, we had initially, this was sent out as an invitation to people in our, you were asking earlier about response rates. This was sent out as an invitation specifically to an audience that we had just recently engaged in. So our open rates were very high. I mean, 47 to 50% unique opens is very high. But the point is, at 47%, the best we would have been able to do was, double it if everybody got off and did something. So the point is, in this, the data of the uplift and personalization for the opens wasn't nearly as high. It was only about 0.9%. The clicks were, and this was actually measured. Anyway, the clicks were, you can see, we more than doubled the actual click-throughs. So those are unique clicks. It does not count if there were multiple. The actual number, I don't have the data on the slide, but the actual number of total clicks, because there were multiple links within the email, so the actual number of total clicks were 2 to 3 times this. But if you look at the unique individuals who clicked, those are the numbers. Quick note, quick takeaway on that. So one, personalization, it works. You should use it. You should use it within the body of your email, and you should avoid using a person's, or the recipient's name or email address in the subject line, because as we said earlier, that's just such a common spammer technique nowadays. But do use personalization. As a side note, because I just mentioned clicks, and I don't have a data slide on this, but another key tip is we get questions about clicks. How many, or links rather, how many links should we put in an email? And the summary is the more links, the better you'll do. So if you have 2 links in your email versus 20, all things being equal, the email with 20 links will virtually always outperform the one with only 2. You want to give your recipients as much opportunity to engage with your email and engage with the communication as possible. So just sort of a quick side note there on a takeaway. Okay, with that, I've got a very simple example of behavioral targeting. So let me walk through that, and then I think we may have time for 1 or 2 questions right after that. So behavioral targeting, what is behavioral targeting? So behavioral targeting tends to be used very heavily in the business-to-consumer space when you look at click rates and response rates, for example, for and approaches for banner displays and so forth. Within email, what it means is being able to create a segment or select your audience based on previous behavior. So I might want to pull out an audience and say, I only want to send to the people who opened a previous campaign, or perhaps I want to send to people who didn't ever do it, who never did anything, who didn't previously open a campaign, or who clicked on a certain link or did not click on certain links. So by looking at a recipient's previous behavior, you segment your audience and then use that as an indication to create your segment or personalize your email using something like one of our dynamic content features. But that's what behavioral targeting is, so based on previous behavior. So here was an example that we came up with to demonstrate the use of behavioral targeting, because this comes up an awful lot. In the B2B versus B2C world, the business-to-business world, we see our typical customers send an email out 1 to 3 times a month. Whether that's good, bad, or otherwise, that seems to be roughly where it is, and that seems to be, they get consistent response rates with that. So, but I also mentioned earlier that the typical open rates are somewhere between 18 and 28%. So you're looking at thinking, okay, well, 72 to 82% of my recipients never saw my email. So I'm only sending out 1, 2, 3 times a month, and 3/4 of the people haven't seen my communication. So in this simple example, what we did is we sent a newsletter on Tuesday, and then the following Tuesday we said we only want to resend that email to the people who did not engage or did not open the previous week. So this way we get an incremental uplift. That's one benefit. We're only reaching people who we didn't reach the first time. And the second benefit is the people who got the email aren't getting yet another email. So you're not over communicating. You're being very wise, or cautious in how you're communicating with your recipients. So here's the results. What we did is, as I mentioned, we sent the first contact list on Tuesday morning to 65,000 recipients. We resent it the following Tuesday to all who did not open based on our behavioral tracking. And so the result is, what were the incremental opens or the uplift in new opens that we received as a result of doing the resend? Okay? So if you look here, I have a table for opens and a little table here for clicks. In the opens on the resend, we had 13,884 that opened out of 65,000 the first time. When we resent it the following Tuesday, an additional 6,872 opened it the second time. Those were people that basically didn't see the email the first time, didn't engage. So by simply resending the same content, which in the business-to-business world, I'm sure most of us in the line here are in the mode here, right, where you don't tend to have a huge marketing department, so it's you tend to be very resource limited in your time available. So this is basically hitting the resend button. So there's very little. It's an extra 60 seconds of work, and you get a 49% uplift in the open rates. The click rates are also very telling. Again, same data, but same set. We saw a 33% uplift in the click rates. So again, very straightforward example, but this is something that our business-to-business customers look at quite often, and it's a typical usage scenario for them, where you have a newsletter, you're sending it out, you don't want to resend to your whole audience and spray and pray, but at least based on previous behavior, or in this case lack of previous behavior, send out, get an incremental uplift with virtually no nominal effort. So interesting results. I'm going to present this one slide, and then we might have a moment or two for questions, but I did want to get this in because this is something that that comes up quite often. So what's the best time of day to open, for open rates rather? And the data on this slide, I presented this, it's actually from a HubSpot presentation, so it's courtesy of HubSpot and MailChimp, another email service provider. But I put it up here because I think they did a really good job in analysis and the presentation of it. So very straightforward. We have some similar data, but it's not as granular. So I thought this was very good. So what they have is, the open rates versus time of day. The takeaway is in the local time zone between 5 and 6 a.m., 5 and 7 a.m. is the best time to get your email or the best open rate. So I don't know about you personally, I'm still not conscious at 5 or 6 a.m., but a lot of people who interface with email are. So the takeaway is you want to get your email sent, so either send it early in the morning in the recipient's time zone, or send it so that it'll appear towards the top of their inbox. So it might be, you might be sending it 2, 3, 4 a.m. local time to make sure it's up towards the top of their inbox. And then you also see a pickup late at night because recipients, obviously are doing some work at home. So anyway, I thought that was a very good summary of data and information, so I want to present that. Okay, and I think with that, Mark, or actually here, let me summarize. Hello? I'm going to go ahead and summarize the results.
Hello?
So,
yeah.
So takeaway is test, test, test. If you want to improve your results, to improve them dramatically, one key takeaway is whatever tool you're using with email, definitely spend some time testing. Number 2, email subject lines. We talked about this. Shorter is better. The sweet spot is between 40 and 50 characters. And yes, that does include spaces. It's a bit challenging to do, but that's the ideal space or length. Special offers, relevance wins. An iPod, for example, in the offer really did not make a material difference. And finally, using something like behavioral targeting can really deliver an uplift of anywhere from 25 to 45% in your results. So, and a key takeaway, I have to reinforce this each time, but stay relevant. I think a lot of questions that came up today really focus around ensuring that you're adding, good, valuable information and staying relevant for your target audience. So with that, Mark, I think we have time for one question, and then we can bring it to a close.
Sure. A couple of questions came up about when you're resending to contacts on your list, does that increase the unsubscribe rate?
That's a good question. I don't have it on the slide, but I'll answer the question 2 ways. Number 1, does that cause incremental unsubscribes? Yes, it does, because you send it the first time, people open it. You send it the second time, a different group of people open it. So you will typically get some additional unsubscribes. The rate of unsubscribe as a result, or as a ratio of opens, was virtually unchanged when we did the testing from what we've seen. So if you have 0.3%, 0.4% that unsubscribe in the first one, when you do a resend, we see virtually identical ratio of unsubscribes. So maybe a slight uplift, but it's usually very consistent.
Okay, another question about, do you have data, or maybe this is a topic for the future, about how time of day impacts click-throughs and opens and unsubscribes?
Yeah, so time of day, I think when you get the slides, this slide is the most useful here. It's slide number 21, time of day versus open rate. So I think that's the one that I would point you to. That's a really good graph. So. Okay, and with that, I think we should cut off. I'll leave you with a few thoughts on future split testing ideas. So here's some ideas of things that we're going to cover in future webinars. A takeaway point for you, for those who are still in line. So got a lot of people here. We will send the slides out afterwards. We'll send a link to the slides as well as the on-demand version of the webinar. And we'll keep you, unless you choose not to and want to opt out, we'll keep you on the list for future invitations. So here's some split testing ideas. We talked about time of day already, but we can do some additional testing on above the fold or above the jump. How do we fine-tune those top 3 lines of the email, and how does that impact results? Graphics versus non-graphics, big debatable topic of whether graphics should or shouldn't be used and to what degree. So we can do some further testing and present some results on the use of graphics and proper use of graphics. Variations in call to actions, the usage of links, where you place links, impact of various layouts, and so forth. So there's some things that I think in our future webinars we'll go ahead and cover in our future split testing. And with that, what I'll do is we do have a few upcoming webinars. Again, if you stay on our list, what we'll do is we'll include the invitations. We're doing these about every 3 or 4 weeks, roughly once a month. And so we have actually a short Pinpoint tour coming up on Friday that was in the initial invitation. We've also done email marketing 101, tips to improve results, writing tips. The next one we have coming up next month, we get a lot of questions on spam filters, so we have one coming up, email marketing 201, how a spam filter works. That's reasonably interesting. It's reasonably technical, so those of you who have a technical liaison or your IT people, you may want to bring them in or pass the invitation along when you receive it, because that's a focus specifically on how spam filters work. And you know, the takeaway for you as email marketers is what things can you do, you know, in creating your emails so that you don't get stuck inappropriately in a spam filter. Okay, I'll leave the contact information on the screen. We do ask folks, you know, we do these for free as educational, so if you like the content, please share it, save it, whatever, send it along to all your friends and enemies. When you get the updated email, we hope that you'll send a link along, you know, share it on social links, tweet about it, post about it, whatever. We'd really appreciate any additional, you know, pass along to your friends and enemies and so forth, or, you know, colleagues within your company. And with that, I'm going to sign off. I appreciate you joining us. And Mark, thanks for the opportunity here this morning, too.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much, Craig.